video that is tentatively titled Reasons Dirty Dancing is the Film We All Deserve and Rarely Get, and some of my theories as to why this is. Now, I was born in 1990 and a lot of my peers grew up with 80s films around them, mainly because their parents were fans of them. They were still kind of recent, still being aired on TV occasionally, and I imagine talked about among adults. However, a combination of having parents that didn't live in the UK for the majority of the 70s and 80s, yes, I am Katie Harron, and my own self-imposed devotion to the sound of music, which I have noted in another video here, meant that I actually really lost out on most 80s films. I haven't seen most 80s films. Knowing that as a fact, a few years ago I picked up this amazing book called Life Moves Pretty Fast by Hadley Freeman. It's a collection of essays or journalistic love letters to Hadley Freeman's favourite 80s movies. I went through a real phase of reading a chapter on each film and then watching the film to try and catch up, really. Tried Labyrinth, Ferris Bueller's Day Off, The Breakfast Club, Princess Bride, and to be honest, most of them completely bemused me until I stumbled upon the chapter on Dirty Dancing. Now, I'd seen Dirty Dancing late in my teens. I think when I was about 17, one of my friends, Bev, lent me the DVD in order to educate me. And at the time, I remember watching it and thinking like, oh, that was pretty fun. But I went back and watched it a few years ago and ever since have been completely obsessed. And because I can attribute almost no personal nostalgia towards this film, it got me thinking about why I really love it and why perhaps the qualities that it displays I find wanting in modern cinema. Some of the research and facts that I present in this book are directly with thanks to Life Moves Pretty Fast, which I really recommend you reading. It's incredible. But I ended up rewatching the film twice in the last week and academically taking notes on why I think it's cool. Okay, that's the whole video. That's what I'm doing. Because when I think something works, it's worth working out why. In the case of Dirty Dancing, it also tells us a lot about the stories we hear now and why certain stories reach us and certain stories don't. For those of you who haven't seen Dirty Dancing, here's 10 seconds on the topic. Baby, otherwise known as Frances, is part of an aspirational middle-class family that takes a holiday in a semi-famous holiday resort in the 60s. The film was released in the 1987, so we're already talking like a lens of nostalgia on top of the other nostalgia that you'll watching it in 2020. Frances is bright, aspirational, determined, altruistic, but she hasn't really seen that much of the real world yet. The ranking of the holiday resort goes as follows. Guests, wait staff who are all hired from Harvard and Princeton and very impressive universities to work there in their summer holidays. And it's explicitly said by the manager that the reason he hires them is so that they can show the guests' daughters a good time and be very impressive, affluent servants. Tory kids as an attraction, essentially. And below those people are the entertainers, so the dancers, presumably the cook staff, the cleaners, that kind of thing. This performative service class will come into play later. Baby, or Frances, I'm just going to call her Frances. I can't seriously call her Baby, not with an accent like this. Baby. Frances is enamoured by the talent of Johnny and Penny, the two head dancers. And after learning that Penny is not involved with Johnny, develops a pretty steamy crush on Johnny. One night, after trying to escape being courted by eligible men, she finds Penny crying on the floor. It comes to light that Robbie, who can only be described as essentially a flouncy Tory boy, has knocked up Penny, convinced her that they're in love, they're in a relationship, and as soon as she was pregnant, refused to help her finance the abortion that he could easily afford. For the reason, in his words, some people matter and some people don't. Hijinks ensue as Frances embarks on a quest to, 1, help Penny get an abortion, and 2, have sex with Johnny. Reasons. I love Dirty Dancing. No, reasons. Dirty Dancing is the film we all deserve and rarely get. It features an abortion. Not only an abortion, but an illegal abortion. Take a moment to think about how many times you've seen that represented in films of late. When watching interviews back with Eleanor Bergstein, who's the writer of Dirty Dancing, it's very obvious that she very explicitly put an illegal abortion that affects the woman negatively in the film and embedded it in the course of the plot. You can't untangle it really from the way the film plays out. A big feature for me of this film, watching it years and years later, is that Frances never questions that Penny wants and needs an abortion. Once that is told to her, she accepts it completely without question of whether she should keep the baby. What is the baby? Why You know? At the time, Eleanor Bergstein also cited this as not really a problem for producers. They were quite normal with it. It wasn't really a thing. It was only after the film got to the cutting stages and their main sponsor, who was a spot cream company, objected to the idea of having an illegal abortion in the film, that it was really questioned. The spot cream company offered them money to go back to the cutting room and cut the abortion out or reshoot. But this was a time, the 80s, from what I can tell from my learnings from the book, studios had much more power over the films they shot, and the directors and writers had say on the final cut of the film. Now that studios are owned by much bigger companies that have other weird objectives in mind, a lot of social messages and political messages end up on the cutting room floor if they are seen in any way to negate the commercial success of a film. Some people might call this censorship, but I'm just a simple farmer from 1864. But in the 80s, when this film was made, Eleanor Bergstein had the power to say, no, I think we'll do without it, thank you. It was already a very low-budget film because people labelled it a women's film and nobody would watch it. So they were like, do you know what? We're going to take a gamble. We can do without your sponsorship money, Spot Cream Company. Because when the film is set, it's illegal for people to access legal abortions. Penny goes for an illegal abortion and she ends up with a kind of like guy with a dirty knife and a fold-up table and becomes very ill. Bergstein put that in the film because she felt precarious about the status of abortion at the time. She felt that people were losing hold of how important abortion was and how important legal abortion was for the equality. 2, the film centres women's desire from a female gaze. Winning combination we barely ever see. From the beginning, it's very clear that Frances has sex on the brain. The film doesn't judge her for that. The film is set up in her perspective. The opening scene shows her saying, this is my story, this is the summer that I spent in this summer camp, and she even says the lines, that was the summer that everybody called me baby, and I didn't even think to question it. It's a coming-of-age story, yes, but it's also not a coming-of-romance story. Sexuality is woven into Frances and Johnny's relationship from the beginning. It's not an embarrassing byproduct of after they've fallen in love. It's a very definite part of them. And if you watch the way the film is shot, you'll see that the shots of Johnny and the very multiple shots of his body are all from Frances' perspective. It's what Frances sees. It's she who hits on him, she who asks him to dance, his body that the camera follows. The camera doesn't molest the woman's body in this pervy, creepy way that I see it doing in a lot of other films. And the framing of the end of the film isn't romanticised. Spoiler alert! They never say words like I love you. The ending of their relationship isn't over-romanticised. They're not like, I love you, you're the one, stay with me forever. While their connection is meaningful, they part as friends. And then they come back for a big, amazing, class-defying dance number. But we'll talk about that later. It's not that she has to find the one and then end up with him forever and promise everything and then lose her virginity. The losing of her virginity is completely within her agency and not tied up in a betrothal. Number 3, the film is completely critical of lofty altruism, empty middle-class tears. In the opening of the film, we see Frances reading this book, The Plight of the Peasant, a book on the economics of developing countries, which is what she later expresses she wants to study at university before joining the Peace Corps. This opening scene shows that she's interested in the theory of helping people, but as the film plays out, you see that she doesn't have much practice in it. That is the flawed basis of our main character. That's what she must fix by the end of the film. The film laughs at that. It criticises that. It asks her to be better. When she comes into contact with people with less privilege than her, she offends them. She says, I envy you to Penny. She's not a fan of that. She shows her that she had to get a job in dancing because it's the only thing that was available to her, and her mum left. Johnny calls her Little Miss Fix-It. And when she does use money to try and fix things, he turns around and says, it must have taken a lot of courage to ask Daddy. But as the film plays out, she develops skills of real empathy. She tries to get Robbie to come good and pay for Penny's abortion, and when he doesn't, she pours water all down him. When the money she does gather from her dad isn't adequate, she herself offers herself in place of Penny and works hard to fill her place in the performance field while she can go and have her abortion. When the abortion doesn't work out, she makes it her problem to solve and find a solution. It's not perfect, but the film applauds her evolution from sympathy to empathy. However far she still has to go. Number 4, the film features soft masculinity. Yes, get in. Soft masculinity. The fave. Johnny does fight Robbie the prickhead. He doesn't lord over his physical defeat of Robbie, but turns to Frances and breaks down crying. We see Frances' dad cry several times. When Johnny opens up and admits that he's been used by the upper class women in the camp, manipulated and threatened into sex, Frances accepts that. She doesn't question it. She doesn't suggest that men aren't also vulnerable to entrapment, because without question she understands the intersection between gender and class and the privileges that can clash there. Johnny doesn't compliment her looks or her body when he talks about why he cares about her. He talks about her integrity, her willingness to try, her intelligence, her determination. Number 5, it shows female respect without rivalry and without fetishized intimacy. Frances isn't overly close with Penny or her sister. I think there can be this trope that women in films, when they do pass the Bechdel test, women are either sparring or insanely cuddled into clusters of closeness. And there is a reality in between that is rarely showcased. When Frances learns that Penny and Johnny used to be involved but are no longer involved, she takes that at face value. She believes that. Even though she's clearly obsessed with Johnny, and Penny is the only foreseeable rival for whom he cares about and defends above all else, she's not a bitch about it. She also accepts her privilege and takes direction and criticism from Penny at multiple points in the film, whilst also comforting her when she needs it, not expecting anything back. Even when, creepily at the beginning of the film, she mentions that no man would match up to the perfect man her dad was. To be followed immediately in the next scene with Penny saying she was going to find the man of her dreams and literally steals Frances' dad out of her own hands in a dance party. There's visual mirroring in the film between the two women, but they're never at odds. Either 80s audiences weren't as thirsty for that kind of reality TV women-on-women conflict, or they just weren't given it because Bergstein saw there were more interesting storylines to give audiences. Number 6, a healthy, critical father and daughter relationship is centred in this film. In this film, I see Frances' dad as a man who is trying to transition out of misogyny for his daughters. He names Frances after Frances Perkins, who was the first woman in cabinet. He boasts over dinner about the fact that she's going to university. Even though it's clear that both parents would also like her to be married off with one of these very eligible waiter-Tory boys. And that his own wife and Frances' mother takes a very in-the-shadows, reclusive female role in their marriage. But one of the praised actions Frances takes is not letting her dad get away with mediocre altruism. While he doesn't judge Penny, he judges Johnny for being poor and assumes that he is the one that knocked Penny up and treats him with a lot of disdain. She criticises him for lying to her when he said that she should help anyone at all costs. He knows that she's having sex and he's disappointed in that, and she makes it clear that he needs to love all of her and everything that she is and not just the parts of her that he likes, which is what makes him cry. Daddy crying. Which is where we get to see his soft masculinity. Does anybody else have a crush on Frances' dad in this film? It's me. It's me. In conclusion, with all those points in mind, why can't I think of a modern equivalent of this film to prize in the same way that I do Dirty Dancing? And why, even without the nostalgia, I still hold this film close to my heart, like I've been watching it my whole life? Well, it's set in a dying time. A speech from the manager at the end shows that the camps are, in his heart, coming to a close. He realises that because of the invention of air travel and how affordable it's becoming, the kids won't want to come to these holiday camps anymore. They'll see them as stuffy and old and boring and not progressive. And he knows that. He's sad about it, but he knows it. The dirty dancing that Johnny and Penny do downstairs with the lower classes, it's very Titanic in that way as well. I think there is like a bit of a gross middle-class girl discovers sexuality through horny poor people. Like, kind of lens that you can see that through. But at the end of the film, that dirty dancing is allowed to come out into the open. Everybody joins in. It is hailed by all classes as the new norm. I think we're encouraged to see this last dance scene as a transition, this hailing in of the new era of sexual liberation and freedom and a world with less class boundaries. But did it hail in that change? As the 90s marched on and we marched into a very dark cloud of lack of female empowerment and nobody passing the Bechdel test again, the fact that studios have less power over their scripts and directors don't have final cut on their films reflects a changing conservative market they were publishing into. Another thing I found interesting when I was reading Life Moves Pretty Fast was I learned the different kind of classifications that films get UK versus the US. In the UK, films have ages attached and those ages are legally binding. So like 12, 15, 18. You can't legally sell a DVD to somebody under that age, but if somebody is that age and comes to the counter, you can legally sell them that DVD. You can legally let them in to the cinema. In the US, parental advisory means that the onus is on the parents. The board isn't in care of the children, the parents are. The parents are, or at least are perceived as, increasingly nervous about what is in these films, and films are commissioned or not commissioned dependent on what the American parent feels is appropriate for their children, and not just a classification that's like, do heads fall off? How much blood is there? Are there nipples? Which is what I kind of imagine the UK system is a lot more like. Like, there are reasons that some films will be classified as 15s, whereas apparently, according to this book, in the US, it's a lot more like, oh, well, how do we feel about abortion this decade? Well, taboo, okay, you won't see it in this film. We need sponsors, bitch. Got to pick a pocket or two. In the book, it says in the last half decade, so I guess whenever that book was published, 5 years before that, the Chinese market had grown by 400% for US films. And increasingly, international markets mean that international moral values can be impressed on films and what is made and what is not made. These huge franchise, blockbuster, very minimal script films keep being shown to us, regurgitated at us, and that apparently is because they need to be easy to be translated, which means slapstick and fast jokes work really well, but more nuanced, drawn out jokes or more subtle, long play, clever jokes don't really cut the mustard in the same way. I can imagine it was still hard to make an amazing feminist film in the 80s, but to me it looks and sounds like it's even harder to make them today. Since this book was written, I think there are some great examples of films defying this a little, although it's still not anything like Dirty Dancing. But I really love Booksmart, I love Lady Bird, there's stuff like that coming, but how precarious is that, and how rare is that, and why don't we live in the end times that the hope of the end of Dirty Dancing predicted? Well, because films need to appeal to as many quadrants as possible. The quadrants are men, women, children, old people. Ah, yes, the 4 genders. And while it's universally understood, I assume with statistics, but also mainly assumptions, that men won't see women's films. By the way, if you are a man, please go and see films that aren't about men every now and then, and note that you've done that somewhere, because it helps. Successes to Dirty Dancing in the book are cited as things like Knocked Up, where abortion is frowned on, or Juno, when a girl is effectively Westboro Baptist Church at the abortion clinic, thinks about the fact that her baby has fingernails and decides not to have the abortion, which would kind of seem more like propaganda for Westboro Baptist Church rather than a feminist awakening and an ownership of pregnancy, don't you think? But who am I? My great bugbear is the success of Frozen. Now, you might see me as some kind of bitter millennial, which you'd be right. I've talked before about my great passion for Wicked, and there are huge amounts of articles and essays on how close the plot of Frozen is to the plot of Wicked. Apart from the fact that Elsa's awakening is finding herself, being her, it's very individualistic, it's very like my strength and power. Whereas Elphaba's incentive was political. She was a political activist. She wanted to change the world for other people. She's sidelined and cast out to a mountain and has to sing a song about that. So I wonder if diluting Elphaba into Elsa is symptomatic of a larger problem. I think it's important to note throughout this film I haven't been wearing any trousers, I've just been wearing dance tights. What do you think about this? Have you seen the film Dirty Dancing? Have I convinced you to see the film Dirty Dancing? How do we fix this problem? How do we find out about the films that aren't being made? And how do we make sure they get funded? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed this kind of a little bit offbeat video from me, do let me know if there's any videos you'd like me to make that are similar to it, any suggestions for films or other things you'd like me to culturally critique. I'd be very interested to hear what you'd be interested in, because I quite enjoy having a bum scratch and thinking about it. If you'd like to support these zany rants, you can go to the Gumption Club and find out how you can support me for as little as $1 and get lots of free stuff to boot. But if you don't want to do any of that, just leave me your favourite Dirty Dancing quote in the comments below. Thank you for watching. I feel like a weight has been lifted from my chest. I feel cathartically better. Cathartic rants do work. And I'll see you in my next one. Frog Snog out. What the fuck was this?